Nathalie Moll, Director General for EFPIA in Brussels. A warm welcome to Stockholm and for this first Nordic Pharma Exchange Conference, where we discuss what's happening in the Nordic countries. You give an excellent keynote presentations on what you see as the coming years in Europe, and you phrased that around 3 key words. It was collaborations, it was competitiveness and change. We think a lot about competitiveness. What can the EU do more to enhance their competitiveness when it comes to life science and pharmaceuticals?
Well, I think this is a really incredibly important moment for Europe right now, because we are clearly in a very global environment, a changing environment at global level. Europe has always historically been very strong in pharmaceutical development, research, production. The US has also been strong, but we see other world actors strengthening their incentives base. And so Europe has to maintain and even reinforce, if you like, the environment in which pharmaceutical companies operate in order to remain a global leader and an innovator. And this means having the right regulatory framework, a stable and predictable regulatory framework, but also the right incentives that are adapted to the incredible science that we're coming up with. So it's encouraging to see a country like Sweden with a life science strategy focusing on the continuum between research and final product development, also looking at competitiveness and how to make the country very competitive.
You were talking about Sweden a little bit. We focus a lot about how Sweden, as a pretty small country in the outskirts of Europe, we have a vast country. It's 10% of the geographic area in Europe, but we only have 2% of the population. How can a small country like Sweden, with ambitions, improve our competitiveness when it comes to life science?
Well, I think you have a leadership role that you can also take. Brexit is creating a certain reorganization within Europe of the, if you like, the leadership in terms of defending competitiveness, innovation and science. It was a role taken very strongly by the UK until now. And I think Sweden and the Nordic countries, who have a history of very strong research and powerful industry as well, can take on that role and at the same time strengthen their visibility and attractiveness as a region and as individual countries.
Earlier during the day, we did a tour of the Nordics, and we focused on some of the issues that you raise now and some of the prerequisites that the Nordic countries have. We have a well-educated population, we have a universal healthcare system that covers everyone, we have pretty good quality of life, we do well in rankings when it comes to innovation, climate as such. What can we do more as an industry association and like pharmaceutical companies in these countries in order to combat AMR? What do you see missing in the European discussions?
So I think that AMR is a very high global concern. It's also in the mission letter from the Commission President-elect to her healthcare commissioner. And I think it's a prerogative for an industry to make sure that we are involved in the fight against AMR. In order to do that, though, we need to solve the situation that this is not a normal business, if you like. So you need to produce a product that should not be sold. And therefore, there is a need for a combination of push incentives in research, pull incentives to get the products onto the market, but also stewardship, proper stewardship and environmental stewardship. So as the AMR Industry Alliance, Global AMR Industry Alliance, we've made a lot of commitments. We've set targets, for example, in discharge and manufacturing, to make sure that we are responsibly manufacturing and dealing with antibiotics that we produce. But in order to create new antibiotics and to create new molecules to combat AMR, there needs to be much more concerted effort, not just at the level of industry, but really at the whole healthcare system, to see how can we fix the fact that since there were no incentives, there are no products on the market.
And linked to that, do you see any initiatives coming out of the EU bureaucracy when it comes to AMR? Now we talk a lot about national initiatives and how we can help, but what do you foresee coming from the EU side?
Well, there have been some action plans, a couple coming from the European Union, asking mainly the member states to take actions. And I think that what we're looking for from the European Union is really to focus on these push and pull incentives that would be European, if you like. Europe has a very successful history of creating legislation to incentivize research in areas where there's little research. For example, in orphan medicinal products and rare diseases, we've had this great regulation since the year 2000. And we'd really be hoping that we could do something like that also for areas of neglected research like AMR, where incentives clearly don't exist and we have an issue.
Moving into another hot and burning topic is the advanced therapies that are coming now, the cell and gene therapy. What can we do more as an industry in the Nordics when it comes to help the healthcare systems by delivering innovative products, but at the same time try to prevent healthcare costs from going through the roof? Because there's a discussion now on how we will be financing the new cell and gene therapies. So
this is the new conundrum of our incredibly advanced scientific development of our industry. We're now no longer only creating therapies to treat symptoms and diseases, but now we're really treating the underlying cause of disease and maybe even going in and modifying genes in order to avoid the disease from ever happening or curing patients. And therefore, we're not providing a service for the whole that will be taken and used for the whole lifetime of a patient, but we are giving a service that will have an impact on the whole lifetime of a patient and on the whole healthcare system. And yet we're not dealing with it in a different way. We're still dealing with it as if it were a treatment. And there is really a need for the whole healthcare system on our side, so the industry, the hospitals, the doctors, the nurses, the patients, all of us to sit together and say, okay, how in that patient journey has the treatment changed the patient journey, which savings have been made, which changes of path does the patient take now? And on the other side of the table, governments need to look at the longer term and say, okay, how do I deal with this innovation, this cure? For sure, the cost seems to come at the beginning when the treatment is given, but what are the benefits for the long term, not only for the patient, but also for society as a whole? How do I adapt? If there are no more stays in hospital, how does that translate in savings? So there needs to be a conversation. What we're advocating at European level is to have a high-level forum where we discuss this as a healthcare system and with member states and the Commission, the transformation in healthcare, both the biotech side and at the data side. How do we manage this in the long term so that we can continue to innovate for the patients of tomorrow as well? We don't have a place to discuss that. We don't have a place to discuss about access yet, and we would really hope that Nordic countries like Sweden, who have life science strategies, who have a vision, can also encourage such a high-level forum.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you for coming to Stockholm, and thank you for the interview, and thank you for the tremendous work you do for us in Brussels.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Thanks.